It's 11 minutes past 10. You're listening to Nehal live on the BBC Asian Network. So, IPSO has cleared the sun. Although they were clear to point out, of course, that the comment could be compared to language used at the time of the Holocaust. Mr. Kavanagh said it was acceptable to say Muslims are a specific rather than a cultural problem. The Independent Press Standards Organisation, they did rule that Trevor Kavanagh's column was capable of causing serious offence. But, you know, you can't make an omelette without breaking a few eggs, can you? Some people would say that what he said was honest. You may not agree with it, but you would admire his honesty. And, of course, if we want a free press, we cannot censor opinions that we don't like. Otherwise, of course, by definition, it's no longer a free press. Let's bring Peter Hitchens in, a columnist for the Mail on Sunday. Good morning, Peter.
Morning.
What do you think of IPSO's ruling?
Well, I don't think they had any alternative under the code. IPSO is really mostly supposed to regulate, and quite rightly supposed to regulate, accuracy above all things. And it's interesting that Trevor Kavanagh, the author of the column itself, has apologised for the wording, saying he had no idea that it would cause the offence that it plainly did. But I think it is an important feature of our society. The expression of opinion is not regulated, that people can actually respond to expression of opinions they don't like strongly and robustly, and rebut things with which they disagree. And I think that's healthy in a free society. And it will sometimes lead to things being said which people find upsetting, and indeed things being said which the people who say them later regret because they've gone too far. I think that's all I can say about the ruling itself.
Do you agree with the Board of Deputies of British Jews, who said that the decision suggests that IPSO is unfit for purpose? After all, if it says, and it does in the code, that there is no clause which prohibits publication of offensive content, does that mean that journalists have carte blanche to say whatever they want?
No, I don't think it does. I think that the IPSO code is an attempt to regulate with considerable force behind it. I have to say that newspapers which breach the code can be subjected to very large fines and be compelled to publish the judgments which are extremely unwelcome to them. So I think it's not by any means a weak code or a weak enforcement system.
But no clause to prohibit publication of offensive content.
No, who would actually be able to define objectively what was offensive? This could become, if it fell into the hands of the wrong people, an engine of tyranny, and under which opinions which certain people felt shouldn't be expressed would not be expressed, and people not come on. This is the way that legal wording works. Once you provide a power in law to somebody, then the way that power is defined in law is the way in which it's applied. You might say the intentions of it were one thing, but the outcome of it will be another, and one has to be very, very careful to ensure that freedom of speech and thought are preserved. In every generation, we face this task because the threat to it.
This is not speech.
Well, one second, sorry.
The Sunday Times.
Okay, Sonny, one moment. Let Peter. Sonny, one moment, and I'll give you plenty of time to respond. Peter, go on, finish your sentence.
It's not as if people are going to come along saying, right, I demand censorship and openly call for the abolition of free speech. They will come along in a form which many people will find attractive. They will say, we don't want
a bit like bigotry. A bit like bigotry. People stay on the right side of the law, but still are able to spew out their bigotry.
Well, what is bigotry? Bigotry is
using the language that the Nazis used to compare the Jews, but using it with the word Muslim instead.
Well, no, hang on a second. I mean, I'm not even. You're treating me as if I'm defending what was said, which I'm absolutely not doing, for a start. So restrict your argument to.
Well, I'm making an example of how bigotry is.
Well, you keep interrupting me as well. It's probably very difficult for you to actually pay any attention to what I'm saying.
Oh, of course
you were given
Peter,
2 ears and one mouth for a reason. And I'm trying to make a point, and you ceaselessly interrupt me. And as a result, I don't think that you can actually appreciate the point that I'm making.
Well, I'm probably a little bit smarter than you give me credit for. Sonny, now you can respond to Peter.
Yeah, I mean, I think that Christopher Hitchens is just trying to
Peter Hitchens.
Not Christopher. Christopher Hitchens, I'm afraid, died in 2011.
Peter, sorry. Peter, I think that he's just trying to divert the argument. This is not about free speech. I mean, I think it should also be pointed out that Trevor Kavanagh is also on the board of IPSO, and I suspect that had a bit of a, that influenced the decision.
I doubt it very much.
Just a few weeks ago, the Sunday Times actually fired a columnist for rightly writing a column which they were talking about the fact that two women were the BBC pay and saying that they were Jewish. And, it was rightly an anti-Semitic column, and he had to be let go because they said this was, this was wrong. So that wasn't, at that point, no one said, oh, this is a free speech issue. We should stand up for the right of people to be anti-Semitic in the media. And I think that there's a double standard here when, you can be, say anything you want about Muslims and people will come on and say, oh, what about our free speech when it's not about free speech.
But Sonny, I've already pointed out the Board of Deputies of British Jews have already said that IPSO was unfit for purpose because of this ruling. So it's not as if the Jewish community is stepping back and saying, oh, well, it's all right to say things about Muslims. They are not at all.
Oh, no. I'm not saying this is about the Jewish community. I'm saying this is about the media. The media industry itself has a double standard on these issues. It rightly takes sensitivity towards other community groups more seriously. But when it comes to Muslims, I do think there is a double standard there when you're allowed to get away with a lot more than you would normally. And that's the point is, I think the Board of Deputies has been absolutely consistent on this issue and said, actually, if we allow this language, that this could, it's bad for not just Muslims, it's bad for Jews and other minorities.
Peter, do
freely demonize them in the media.
Peter, don't journalists, though, have a responsibility to not sow the seeds of discord and be much more careful in the language they use? And you've made it very clear already that you're not here to defend, nor would you defend what Trevor Kavanagh said.
Well, of course they do. Of course they have a responsibility. Myself, I believe that responsibility lies with us as individuals. It's fundamentally a moral responsibility. And I would personally prefer it if there were no regulatory bodies. I've never really been happy with the idea of the regulation of journalism because I'm afraid it will develop into an apparatus for control. And I think that it is up to us. It's a moral question. There are, of course, laws of libel, and indeed, since the 1960s, there have been, in my view, quite rightly, laws which prevent, for instance, racial discrimination. And that I thought was necessary at the time, and I defend it now, even though I'm in most respects a free speech absolutist, because I think that we had new citizens among us who were being treated with extreme disrespect, and they needed protection from that. But I don't think that we should rush into yet more regulation and ultimately legal restriction of speech, because that way does inevitably lie censorship. Once you create these powers, they will be used. And when they're used, they will not necessarily be used in the way in which those who drew them up expected them to be used. So be very careful about what you create. I just think it's an important warning, has to be made in every generation. The call for restrictions on speech will never present itself as somebody standing up saying, I want censorship. It will always present itself in some other, much more attractive and appealing form. And that's why you should be so careful about it. And it's never popular, actually, to defend freedom of speech, and I don't expect anyone to love me for defending it. Because under these circumstances, I can very quickly be portrayed as what I'm not, as defending the saying of certain things which I myself would not say and don't particularly approve of. I'm not doing that. I'm just saying, if you begin to introduce legal or effectively quasi-legal restrictions on freedom of speech, that is the beginning of the road to censorship and suppression, and we will all be the poorer because of it.
But what about the road? Oh, go on, Sonny.
Sorry, I disagree with that. You can have very consistent and very clear rules on what is allowed and what isn't allowed. You're not allowed libel for good reason. You're not allowed to incite violence against people in the media, and for good reason. And I think that IPSO has been terrible in this decision, and you can actually say that it's fine to criticize people's beliefs. It's fine to criticize people's religion. It's fine to even ridicule people's religion, but you should not be dehumanizing a group, a community of people. That is a clear distinction to make so that you can be offensive if you want to in the media. You can challenge people's beliefs if you want in the media, but you are not allowed to dehumanize an entire group. It is not that difficult to make sure that these distinctions are put in place and that people have the right to be offensive in the media and you have free speech. I mean, this is just some bizarre, stupid claim that, if we have any sort of regulation that, free speech is suddenly going to be hindered. It's just...
Well, you don't need to worry about that because, as Peter well knows, there's never going to be a regulatory-free press in this country, certainly.
Not anymore.
No, there definitely isn't going to be. So, Peter, then, what about who should censor the people who aren't as responsible as you in their use of language?
You've come to the wrong shop if you want to ask me who should censor anybody, because, as I say, I take the Edmund Burke view that men should restrain themselves.
But what if they don't, Peter? I like this utopia that you want to exist in.
If they don't, then it may well be, that terrible things of the kind that I oppose will happen. But you can't expect me to design a system for restricting speech myself when I don't approve of such a system existing. You have to ask somebody else to do that. My function here, and the reason why I'm taking part in this discussion, is to warn against restrictions on freedom of speech. I would much rather that people restrain themselves in what they said, according to manners and humanity, and that we had civilized discourse. But I would still rather have the United States system of the First Amendment, which absolutely protects freedom of speech, and in which any attempt to restrict it has to be argued very, very seriously in the courts on very narrow grounds. So, for instance, as my fellow guest has said, the incitement to violence is not permitted. The famous example of shouting fire falsely in a crowded theatre is also not permitted. But beyond that, it's been decided by US jurisprudence that in general you can say anything and people can say anything back. And freedom depends on that. Now, the other thing is that people can take offense at something that's been said because they disagree with it, and it's not unknown for people then to misrepresent what has been said as personally insulting or in some way bigoted, when in fact all they're trying to do is to whip up a fury against the person who says something they disagree with.
Should we be protected?
I experienced this quite a lot myself, and it's a very effective method, especially when you're backed up by the Twitter mob, of silencing someone whose opinions you don't like. And I think this is a genuine threat to freedom of speech among us, and you have to be careful whether you're about supporting or endorsing this. Myself, I think we should be very cautious about going into these kinds of Twitter mob attacks on people simply for saying things which often turn out not to have been as accused, and people being portrayed as bigots and racially prejudiced when in fact they haven't been.
You're giving carte blanche, aren't you? Clearly, I mean that's what you want for your fellow journalists to be able to say whatever they want.
No, that's a complete straw man. I haven't said anything of the kind.
Yes, you have, because you don't wish them to. If there's no risk of punishment, then what? But they're not. Clearly, are they? They're not. So, and you don't want them to be punished. Therefore, nothing will happen to them. Therefore, they have carte blanche.
Well, I think,
by definition.
Well, that's your logic. It's not a logic.
It is logic, not mine. It's logic.
You're just falsely portraying.
In that way. For my listeners. That's
your affair. You're doing one of the very things which I'm against. You're abusing a position of influence at a microphone by falsely portraying. Which a guest of yours.
Well, at least I get to people to answer me back and call in, unlike a column that you write in the paper. But
I wouldn't want to. Well, the difference is partly that you're
live.
That you're a. Wait a minute. The difference is partly that that what you do is financed by a license fee.
Oh, okay. All right, Peter. All right, fine. Okay, right. You're going off on a tangent. Okay, you believe that people can say whatever they want to say in newspapers and have no censor. Okay.
First of all, you
Peter,
misrepresent me. Then you talk over.
I didn't misrepresent you. I told you exactly what you said. But when I said it back to you, you didn't like how it sounded.
Well, I don't.
So you can.
Frankly,
you
I
can
don't
exist.
care if you want to misrepresent me. That ultimately,
I'm not misrepresenting
is
you.
between you and whatever morals you possess.
Go to the iPlayer and listen to the logic of it, Peter.
To any listeners who care to know, this is what I think you're doing. I don't accept.
Okay.
I don't accept either your ceaseless.
So what will stop journalists from saying whatever?
Of what I say. Why invite me on if you don't want me to talk?
I've let you speak plenty, Peter.
Why invite me? Well, you've let me speak part of the time. Whenever I say anything you don't like, you start talking over.
My job is to challenge you.
It's not very professional.
You don't like to be challenged, clearly, Peter. Thank you very much for joining us.
I go out and seek to be challenged.
Okay, well, you're not very good at it on the radio, clearly.
See, there you are again.
Thank you.
You talk over me using your studio microphone to obliterate.
You have your own microphone,
so people can't hear me.
People have heard you plenty,
I'm sorry,
Peter. Thank you.
I know perfectly well that you have that you're talking over me means that most listeners can't hear me properly. So
okay, I think they heard you plenty, Peter. Okay, what they no longer want to hear is you complaining about me. So, Peter, thank you for joining us. Peter Hitchens, there, columnist for the Mail on Sunday. What a bizarre interaction that was.